the old gunslinger. Namaste. It's a long way over there.
I don't want to Namaste. The divine in me recognizes the divine in you.
Yes. Sorry. This is, we were talking about this passage on the way down, but today is Christ the King, the Feast of Christ the King. Unless you're in one of those Protestant churches who insists on calling it Reformation Sunday.
Yeah.
Not because this day in history has anything to do with the Reformation, it's just because they couldn't call it Christ the King because that bothered them. And I don't know that there's a whole lot, and Christ the King has only been Christ the King for about 140 years or so it's not as if it's an ancient feast. And I wish they would have called it Everything's Going to Be All Right. Remember at the beginning, there's a Rolling Stones song. Which one is it? I think it's Mannish Boy, that at the beginning uses a sample from way before from when they sampled the Howlin' Wolf singing Everything's Going to Be All Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I always think of when I think of Christ the King. But they didn't want to talk about everything's all right. So I decided I'd rather talk about whatever I called it, which I don't know because I don't have one. Oh boy. In the final analysis. And if you remember, 2 Sundays ago was, depending on how you look at it, the 10 virgins, or the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgins. Either way, there were 10 of them. With the oil lamps and the bridegroom showing up, and I said, the bridegroom is not Jesus, or God. And then last week it was the coins, the 5 coins, the 2 coins, the 1 coin. And I said the master was not God, the master was not Jesus. I want to say, in this story, the master, or the king, is God, and the king is Jesus. And we'll talk about why in a little bit. But I want to talk about Bodhisattva first. It was this idea that came out of Mahayana Buddhism. And if you remember back when we did Wayne Teasdale's book, The Mystic Heart, I had this chart. And so you get the Buddha 500 years before Christ. And then about arguably 100 years or so after that, you get the start of Theravadan Buddhism and the Mahayana traditions, out of which we get Zen and Tibetan. Those start more or less around the time Jesus was around. And I'm sort of the opinion, not that I can prove it, but that it probably was because the trade route went through Nazareth. The trade route from the east did go through Nazareth. That there was probably the beginning of some exchange of ideas between the Middle East and the Asian countries. And they might have caught on to this idea that Jesus came back, and they started to say, well, what if you really wanted to help people, what would you do? And it's that you would say, even if I'm entitled to enlightenment, and therefore nirvana, I want to be reincarnated until all beings achieve the enlightenment and therefore nirvana. And it's the closest concept, probably, in Buddhism to the Christian ideas of social justice and concern for the less fortunate. You could argue, and there certainly are people in Buddhism who turn it into, they reduce it to this navel-gazing. It's all about me and my enlightenment. But the more rational people say, yes, but.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, but if you're really moving towards enlightenment, you're going to be awakened to the fact that there's folks around you that need help. And this particular passage, even though we've been reading in Matthew 25 for 3 weeks, because that first story about the virgins was the beginning of Matthew 25. Whenever anybody says Matthew 25, it's this they're talking about. It's, I was hungry and you fed me, naked and you clothed me, a stranger, sick and you visited me, in prison, sick or in prison and you visited me. It's the heart of the gospel. But we don't like that. In fact, it's interesting that this comes up on Reformation Sunday when a lot of people decided all that stuff doesn't matter. All that matters is that you have faith. Which leads to all these arguments about faith and works. But I want to make it real simple. What you do matters. And just as the Theravadan Buddhists who have the earliest scriptures in the Pali language, the pure Theravadins don't believe in Bodhisattva vow, don't believe in coming back, believe that my job is to get me enlightened. But the fact that there are Theravadan Buddhists who say in defense of themselves, as you move towards that process, you start to look out and care about other people. And as you develop more compassion for yourself, you develop more compassion for others. The same thing's true of people on the Christian path. As you advance along the path, you will start to care about other people. If you really have faith, as opposed to a get-out-of-jail-free card, Jesus is my bail bondsman, you know? So that I believe, and that's all I have to do is say I believe, and maybe say a particular prayer, and then when I get to heaven, if it isn't working out at the gates the way I want it to work out, I just pull out Jesus, you know, my Jesus is my bail bondsman card, and then Howlin' Wolf starts singing, everything's going to be all right. But nonsense, because if you really believe, or I'd rather say, if you really walk the spiritual path, you will start to care about other people. It's just that in the same way that Theravadan Buddhists develop compassion for all people, a Christian will develop compassion for all people if they walk the spiritual path, which means if they have a spiritual practice. And that, my friends, is a work, and that's too bad. Luther was wrong. Luther was wrong because there is this process we go through as we become deeper and deeper in our spirituality that does change us. And so we can argue about the chicken or the egg. Have you ever seen the cartoon where there's a bed and the chicken's lying in the bed and the egg's lying in the bed smoking a cigarette, and the chicken says, well, I guess that answers that question? This is, you know, we can get involved in these side arguments all we want, and it's all it is a waste of time. And yet, you'll notice that in nowhere does it say, you protested the abortion clinic and it made me happy. You decided who to excommunicate and it gave me a tickle. I mean, none of these things that many people who really claim to have faith get involved in, which are all games about. I mean, it all comes down to who's worthy and who isn't. Who's welcome and who isn't. It's the basic question. Who can we kick out of here so we have a little more evidence that we're really quite okay? That's not in Matthew 25 at all. It doesn't even occur in there. And it's no accident that the churches that spend a lot of time trying to find people to get rid of also say that the social gospel is a fictional creation of liberal churches. Well, it's pretty hard to say that when it's right there in Matthew 25, but it's what Richard Ward talks about. If the particular passage is inconvenient, we just don't read it on Sunday. And so we don't read the Sermon on the Mount. We stay the heck away from Matthew 25 and decide to do Reformation Sunday instead. And I believe we miss the heart of everything. Because if it's only about me and what I do, there's a name for that. It's called, well, I was thinking of masturbation, but ego's good too. If it's only about me and what I do, narcissism is good too. Well, narcissism is like, kind of like taking masturbation as a career. You know, it's all about me. So I'll just close the doors, pull the shades, light some candles, put on some soft music.
And where is that?
Where are my rechargeable batteries? That's right. And so, that is, though, a huge perspective difference. And when we start wondering why we can't get along, when we do the spiritual Rodney King, why can't we all just get along? This is the answer. This is a huge gulf between a group of people who think it's all about securing a life insurance policy and Jesus is my bail bondsman, versus people who believe or think or feel, whatever words you want to use on either side of it, that it's all about making a better world. And the only way you can get away from that's your responsibility is to very selectively read the passages where Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within you, among you, present tense, here, now, and not something you're building and creating for later. And if you look at the Jesus is bail bondsman churches, they do outreach. But where do they tend to do it? Developing world. Well, yeah, abortion clinics. But if they're going to give money to build something, developing world. Why? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's great. You know, Cluck Cluck needs fresh water too. But, well, it's your name. But, here's the thing. What does that let me do? Write a check and throw it, right? So I never get dirty. It gives me the insulation of thousands of miles. So I never have to get dirty. I'm still comfortable. I never have to see those people. We can send some missionaries who might be willing to see those people, and I can write another check and support them. And what the missionaries go and do is good and wonderful, unless they're saying, would you like some clean water? Let me tell you about Jesus. Unless they're saying, in a Muslim country where it's very dangerous to be a Christian, you need to convert. Right? That's all problematic. But what Jesus' bail bondsman does is it insulates me from anybody I don't particularly care for, like, am comfortable around. And let's see, who might I be uncomfortable around? Well, the hungry, the homeless, the sick, the naked, with a few exceptions, the people in prison. You know, and even if it's somebody, this is an ironic thing too, even if it's somebody where you're thinking, gee, I'd really like to see them naked, the minute you did, if you're like me, I'd become so self-conscious that I wouldn't even enjoy that. So, we don't want to see naked people, hungry people, starving people, sick people, or people in prison. And who exactly does Jesus tell us here we have to go see?
Them guys.
Them guys. That it's not checkbook, toss it halfway around the world. And sometimes it's checkbook, toss it just a few miles from Waukesha County to Milwaukee County so we can have our sister parish in the hood. And maybe we invite them out once a year, but we certainly don't go down there because there's no safe place to park our car. Right?
Or
Chow.
Or Chow. Yes, Chow and his people. And so, maybe you were here when I told that story. We had, I had a parish out in Waukesha, and we did ministry, White People's Guild for the Vietnam War. We did ministry to Hmong people in Milwaukee County.
35th state.
Yep, by writing checks. We would, and some of it was good. We had this little Christmas tree during Advent we put up, and we were buying 50-pound bags of rice, which got them through like 6 months. Rice was a staple of their diet. And then we actually used a local grocer down there to provide the rice, so that was a good thing. I mean, it's keeping it in the community, but we invited them out once a year. And once we had their leader, because the very tribal culture still come out and they wanted to learn more about them, he talked, and instead of a homily, he talked. And we had this woman who was listening, and his name was Chuck Cha. And so, it probably really wasn't Chuck, you know.
Okay.
But we get around in a circle, we're praying, holding hands, because we had to do that, because these are old hippie liberal Catholics, ex-Catholics. And one woman says, I want to pray for Chow and his people. And of course I'm going, Puppy Chow?
I know, it's like, you know, the little puppy.
Kitten Chow, Dog Chow, Pony Chow. There's Chows, yeah, I don't know if you know
Chicken
them.
chow.
Yeah?
And monkey chow.
Karina makes chow for a lot of animals. But this wasn't Chuck Chow, this was Chuck Chow. So, but that's the evidence of that. You know, they could come out to us once a year, but we didn't go down there because that shit's scary.
Well, then how'd you put up the tree?
Well, it was a little
You
tree
give them rice.
in our sanctuary. There were, you know, so like if,
Oh,
that
yeah.
showed our progress. You know, so if we had, you know, there were however many bags of rice we needed, that's how many slots that were on the tree, and if somebody gave the $30 for the bag of rice or whatever, we put one thing on the tree.
So they had to come out and get the stuff?
No, that got delivered.
Oh, okay.
But we had him come out this time to talk to us, and then we had a textbook scholarship fund for the students that went to college, and we'd have them come out to a picnic once a year. But otherwise, you'd send money, send the stuff, get the local grocer to deliver it. And for a while, use our garage near Mayfair as the place where when people gave things, we'd hold them in our garage, because I didn't care if they came to my garage, oddly enough. So many times, though, wrapping back around, when this passage is used in a church, they don't read that second part. Right? We don't want to hear about what happens if you don't. Yeah, the ghosts. Really? And of course, I don't believe in hell. But I believe that there is a natural punishment, self-inflicted, that would come if you got to a place where you realized that what it really came down to was being kind to other people and meeting their needs. And you were standing before God literally or metaphorically and said, holy cow, I missed the boat. I believe there's a torment to that. I believe that, because I'm also a Christian reincarnationist, that you do get to go around again. And that is a kind of purification by fire, to quote 1st or 2nd Peter, I always forget which. And that actions do have consequences. And that even though I don't believe anybody goes to hell, and I don't believe if there is a hell, it's a permanent place, I can't imagine what it would be like to whip out your Jesus' bail bondsman card and discover that it wasn't about that at all. And that all the times you went and voted against things like Obamacare and didn't have a substitute plan, anytime you were involved with an immigration plan, cutting funding to schools that meant that kids wouldn't have meals, that these were the things that mattered. And that those things that you believed that mattered, the ins and the outs, the who's welcomes and the who's isn't, and the who isn't, are really just games we play with ourselves to make ourselves feel better about us, which is a lot like masturbating. Because it just makes me feel better and doesn't impact anybody else unless I choose to do it at the park. And so,
That's not a good idea.
you know, I can tell you a story about that too. And so when you come down to the last Sunday of the church year, which this is, next Sunday is the beginning of Advent, and you come down to the things that really matter, it's the tiniest act of kindness is infinitely more important than the most complicated doctrinal position you could possibly arrive at that took you years of thinking. In fact, I would say the entire Summa Theologica, the Thomas Aquinas tome, is outweighed by the tiniest kindness. And we have this desire, this need for some reason to make it more complicated than it is. And maybe it's that we don't trust that it's as easy as it is. Maybe it's that we don't trust that we're actually worthy of anything good. But Christ the King comes around to remind us each year that, yes, we are, and so is everybody else.